and later we studied that how did the international relations have been shaped with the emergence of First World War or be it Second World War. So, and yesterday we have also read about how did the colonialism has affected the nations and how did USA, UK, and France, the superpowers back then, and Soviet Russia have emerged to be as a the industrial nations. And later in other class also we have read about how did the great economic depression 29-32 and the consequences of interwar period, like how did it really shape or really helped in shaping the international space. So today we'll be learning about League of Nations. Like particularly you might have understood that there is no League of Nations as of such. So So, how did the League of Nations, as we think of today, do not exist as such? So, it has come, or its successor, or United Nations, have come into the picture. So, the League of Nations is nothing but it's a peace treaty. It's a peace international organization. So, what happened was it was a baby. It was a the policy outcome, or it was the idea of the Woodrow Wilson, who came up with the 14-point formula and the peace treaty, so that these countries would be uh, together, and these countries would be acting with each other, like they would not go for this war-like situations, and this League of Nations would act as a what can we say, like if there's any war like situations it would try controlling that. So but on very basic point this League of Nations did not last. So if you look at the reason why it did not last is because as yesterday we have read about the treaties, various treaties, Versailles treaty and the peace conference. So the Versailles treaty and this League of Nations, so League of Nations was made as a part of Versailles treaty and the peace treaty. So, in a viewpoint of making it as a part of that, the countries did not see this as an solution. They actually saw this as a push on countries, on the states that have lost to it. So that's why that was a bad idea of pushing that with those treaties, but rather it should have been made separately. So why there was an urgency means, so 19th century, by the end of 19th century and the beginning of 20th century, the wars and the discovery of more destructive weapons have led for the establishment of international organizations to avoid wars. So basically this was point of like how this fastly evolving industrial society and their development tactics, they pumped more money into developing this uh, machines or the more powerful weapons. So it was kind of basically to they know what they're doing, right? So that's why these countries have come together and came up with this organization where they thought it could at least try stop the war. But with the terrible massacre of human souls and untold distress and large-scale destruction of private and national properties and horror of deadly scientific weapons left an indelible impression upon their minds. So this is the sole criteria or sole basis if somebody asks you like why did they go for League of Nations. So this is a sole criteria that they made it as such. So if we look at the genesis of League of Nations, see if you are preparing for competitive exam or if you're writing any theory exams, you need to be very particular about the timeline. You need to be very particular about how did it evolve. So if you look at League of Nations, it was proposed by Sir Henry Campbell during the League of Peace in 1905. And in 1911, Edward Grey emphasized the need for establishing some sort of committee or concern of nations. So this all theories and international experts, they understood that as there is no central authority in international space, as there prevails anarchy, it is very hard to control these powerful nations. So that's why they thought that there should be an organization that should look into the or that should at least try control the over power, or like the exercising of accumulation of weapons. All these things should be controlled. So that's why this League of Nations, they thought that it could be able to avoid any warlike situations like First World War. So, and in 1917, in August, Pope Benedict 15 had pleaded for the settlement of international disputes by arbitration instead of war. So they were like, if there was any warlike situations, or if there was any actual war that could be happening, these countries, instead of taking sides and uh, fighting for the fighting in the war, which could cause the actual destruction, instead of that, rather they should look for peace settlement. So they should look for settlement rather than arbitration. So the movements for the peace also gained ground in Germany and Scandinavian countries. So, and in 1915, an organization called League to Enforce Peace was formed in America. Then Then the establishment of international organization received a special impetus when President Wilson announced this 14 historic point formula in 1918. So basically, the Paris Peace Conference was a setup, did set up a commission under Woodrow Wilson's chairmanship. And then what happened was League Covenant was adopted by Paris Peace Treaty, and it was signed as a part of Treaty of Versailles in 1919. So this was the basic mistake, as it said by the experts, that it should rather be signed separately than pushed it through this Treaty of Versailles or Paris Peace Conference. So basically, in this League Covenant, there are 16 articles, and this was headquartered in Geneva, which is in Switzerland. Now let us understand the aims and objectives of League of Nations. See, what could be the more aim and objective of any League of Nations or any organization which claims that it is peaceful organization? So it is actually to promote international cooperation, to promote international peace and security, and it stated all these aims and objectives are stated in preamble of the covenant. Then integral territorial integrity and existing political independence of all members are the basic goals of this League of Nations. So basically, like League of Nations is nothing but it won't replace the government at in the countries, but rather it would settle disputes between two or more nations if they are happening in international space, and if these two or more nations could cause the destructions which would involve furthermore nations, just like what happened in World War One. So that's how the things have been made, and the signatory states to the League Covenant pledged to maintain world peace and security through international cooperation instead of resorting to war. So not just that, not just the organization should look into like not uh, make or not promote war, but rather these countries which are part of this League Covenant are also should take as a responsibility in stopping or in making the countries to stop from resorting to war. So then in Article 10 of the League Covenant, it is agreed that in any conflict between two or more nations, it would accept League's mediation and would not resort to arms during this mediation. So the League of Nations is basically nothing but it's a mediator. So what is the duty of mediator? The duty of mediator is the countries should listen to those mediators and rather not retaliate while this mediator period is going on. So that's why it's basically like they will act over the sovereignty in international space. So, in another article, Lee Covenant made it clear that member states would impose economic blockade and would even enforce military measures if the necessary against any state violating the covenant. So, it's not just that the countries should not go to war or should countries should balance, but rather this. if any states, they can actually boycott any of this League of Nations state uh, if they are acting against the covenant principles. So this is basically you can boycott anything through economic blockade or through trade, and also it calls for military enforcement. So in such ways you can avoid any nation going for war. Then membership of League of Nations. Any full self-governing state with a recognized and stable government could be admitted into the league. So this here they call for mostly the democratic and the stable governing states, because they are sovereign and the people elect them. So in a way they could be dealing with the democratic states. And rules of the admission of new members requires the two-thirds vote of the assembly. So if any new country wanting to take membership, then it has to be approved by two-thirds of the vote of the assembly. Then main organs of League of Nations. So there is nothing but there are three agencies with the League of Nations. First one is Assembly, second one is Council, and third one is Secretariat. So these are associated with the League, and these are autonomous organizations. Uh, sorry, Assembly, Council, and Secretariat are associated with the League of Nations. And there are two other autonomous organizations, which is Permanent Court of International Justice and International Labour Organization. So these two are the autonomous organizations which function under League of Nations. Now let us understand about what is the powers, functions of Assembly. So it is an political and representative organ of League of Nations where the member countries are represented, and member of League of Nations automatically becomes a member of Assembly. And in this the state is permitted to send a maximum of three representatives to the Assembly, but it will have only one vote. So even though you will send three members, you will not get to vote three times, but rather you will have one vote. Then the unanimous agreement of the members present at the meeting. So if they want to take action or they want to amend any of such uh, articles, then they should unanimously, all the members should unanimously agree to the meeting. And assembly was expected to meet at least once a year. Then what are the functions of the assembly? The admission of new members. Then it will annually elect non-permanent members of the council. Then it needs approval of addition of members to the council. Then approval of council's nomination of general secretary, then join election with the Council of Judges of Permanent Court of International Justice. So these are all basic functions of the assembly. Now let us understand what is council. So the council is basically a smaller body which acts as an executive organ of the league. So there are five permanent members of this council. Those five permanent members are USA, UK, France, Italy, and Japan. And there exist also four non-permanent members which keep rotating. Okay, so in 1926, Germany was also made as a permanent member of the council, and emergency meetings of the council should also be could also be summoned. Then functions of the council. Then chief function of the council is to hear disputes that are referred to it. So this council does what? This council settles dispute. It acts as a dispute settlement between the states. So this council will have uh, a power where this council will have a power where the countries would be allowed to put forward their issues. The next one, it has no power of independent action. Then council was confirmed with certain special powers and functions. So, and next one is secretariat. So the covenant is also provided for the permanent secretariat. This has to be headed by Secretary General, and Secretary General is appointed by the Council on the approval of Assembly, and maintenance of secretariat was not met through the contributions made by the member states in proportion, but in proportion decided by the assembly. So the secretariat also, the membership and all those things are not just randomly done. The assembly selects the members. The assembly elects the certain number and to be the members of the council. Next, the functions of the Secretariat. So, what does Secretariat do? Secretariat acts as a coordinating agent in the different activities of the League, which are carried by its various organs. So, but keeping the records, it keeps the records of the League agencies, it furnishes the necessary information, which is important for the delegates. Then it registers the treaties that happens between the states. Then it looks into the international engagements that are entered into by members. Then it arranges meeting of the different organs of the league. So all these are functions of the secretariat. So if you have, I'm hoping that you have already read about the United Nations Secretariat, General Assembly, and all the other five bodies which are present in United Nations. So the more or less the functions of League of Nations are also as such. Then let's talk about Permanent Court of International Justice. So what is Permanent Court of International Justice? So under Article 14 of League Covenant, it was entrusted with the Council responsibility for formulating plans. So now this Permanent Court of Justice, International Justice, is placed at Hague in 1922, and it contains 11 judges and 4 deputy judges. Then court is dealt. Now it's not like any other court of our state or any other country, but it is dealt with only legal disputes between the states, and not just any legal disputes on the basis of the enmity or ego clashes, but the alleged breach of treaties or different interpretations of the international law, which could result in dispute between two or more nations. Then next one is International Labour Organization. It is set up as an integral part of League of Nations, and all the members of the league becomes members of International Labour Organization. This is to promote international peace through promotion of social justice. So, what does this social justice mean? It is regulation of working hours, labor supply, prevention of unemployment, then providing adequate living wages. So, all these are the important functions of International Labor Organization. Now, let's talk about nature of League of Nations. So, League of Nations cannot be described as a superstate or a federation because it's nothing but it's not a geographical entity, so it doesn't have a elected represent I mean elected means it doesn't have people. Possibly it's not a country, so neither does it run a country. So this League of Nations is not just a federation, then because people are free to leave, and they do not lose, sorry, people, not people, the countries do not lose their sovereignty also. So this is just an international organization, peace organizations, where the states are coming together, okay, to settle disputes, then to look forward to international peace. Then members of the league had agreed to restrict their freedom in certain cases for the in certain cases for the cooperation and preservation of international cooperation. So, as Oppenheimer has describes this as an organized family of nations. So it's also they call it as an organized family of nations, but it is also It acts like a family where there's one at the higher authority who implies executive power on other smaller nations, and smaller nations should obviously have to listen to this higher authority. If not, they will be shown with tariffs, or if not, there could be attacked. So anything would be happening. So the smaller nations are at much risk in accepting to the terms and regulations. Next is activities of League of Nations. Activities of League of Nations. So League of Nations also, although they say that it's a failure, but it still existed for 20 years. So it also was succeeded in tackling the disputes between Sweden and Finland over Alan Islands, and Poland and Germany over Upper Silesia, and Lithuania and Poland over Vilna, and Greek and Bulgaria over the borders. But in spite of its success stories, there exist where the league there exist situations where the League of Nations kept quiet. So this can be seen in Japan's invasion over Manchuria in 1931. In fact, Japan is a permanent member. Then Italy's aggression over Abyssinia. So these are all things you can understand. Like League of Nations, um, even though it tried controlling the disputes, but it did not really control most of the disputes. Then it failed its main purpose of political sphere to execute the principle of disarmament, or to prevent further warfare. So its efforts in its economic and social humanitarian fields are commendable. It's mainly responsible for spreading of international cooperation, uh, amity, and internationalism. So the League also solved the problem of resettlement of refugees by coordinating activities of various governments and charitable institutions. So see, there are positives and negatives that have been done. Like some of the things that are successful, which are done by the league, some of the things are unsuccessful. But most importantly, it did not succeed in stopping the war. It in fact it did not act as a peace organizations when it was needed. So that's why it led to emergence of Second World War. If it had not been turned a blind eye to these issues that have been going on in international space, the Second World War could not have happened, but also it should have been looked into about the war reparations or war indemnity which were put on the Germany. Because the German people have taken it moral sense, and they have taken it in notion of pride. They thought they were humiliated, so which led to the disruption and also the emergence of Second World War. Now the causes for the failure of League of Nations. So the what could be the causes? So what are the causes? Causes for the failure of League of Nations. So the failure of League of Nations, you can call it as a political blunder, because it was made as a part and parcel of peace treaties, and as they were made as a part of peace treaties, most of the countries had been refused to sign to this. So why because so let's suppose it is made as a part of peace treaties, and these peace treaties are nothing but war indemnity, and the moment of humiliation on the powers which are lost in the World War. So, if assigning to that, if abided by the other countries, they thought they were also equally disrespecting this countries as such. So that's why most of the countries did not sign the treaties. And it was not very particular or clear about its ideas and objectives. So it made the countries really think twice about its real aim and objective. So that's why it was not rather popular among the countries, and the lack of cooperation of big powers. So listen, so what happened was USA most of the part stayed out of the World War, right? So it had come at the end, and it also followed mostly the protectionist policy. So once the war was over, the UK and France had been destructed, had been lost by the economy, or the war destruction was very huge. So USA had tried to make the resentment, or USA had tried to USA had tried to do the settlements where the UK and France were paid heavy war indemnity by Germany, where Germany was also struggling. So for that struggling economy, USA had lent their money to Germany, which was uh, ulta given to UK and France. Then this UK and France are also were paying the debts to USA. So it was kind of USA was making a lot of money, and most of the part it stayed out of the war. So that's why it did not and also it did not lose any of the economy that had been spoiled, or any of the structures that have been spoiled with the war. And lack this is what. And Russia. So with the Bolshevik Revolution, the capitalist Western powers, they were scared that this might be another case for the communism to outbreak in the Western parts also. So they were very skeptical to go for a balance, or they were very skeptical to act on a equal note, because they were not trusting each other. So that's why the cooperation was not seen. Then voting system in League of Nations, uh, Assembly and Council was highly defective. So it was rather not democratic, and it was the procedures were defective. And unanimous agreement created troubles in matter of taking decisions in the league. So like how do you expect the powerful nations to come together and take unanimous decisions, which some of the decisions could be favorable to them, and some of the decisions could not be favorable to them, but rather they would be favorable to their enemies or the other superpowers? So, do you expect the equals to come together and take decisions which would benefit their opposite, or rather enemy state? No, right. So that's why the unanimous agreements were very troublesome. They could not be achieved properly. Then lack of power to execute its own decisions. So, as USA had been the powerful, both political, economic wise, it controlled most of the league's decisions and the funding. If you see, not just League of Nations, if you look at United Nations also, USA plays an upper hand. It always has an upper hand and plays a crucial role, where the powerful decisions would be taken by it, and because most of the funding is done by USA. So that's how the decisions or execute the its own league's decision would not be easily done, because it needs the approval of all the superpowers, all the secretary members, and which is very tough to achieve. You can see that before, why did the league fail in that notion? The league had weakly demonstrated, was clearly demonstrated and one-sided when Italy and Japan invaded Manchuria and Abyssinia. So the league did not do anything. Whether when it should be taking action against these nations. So these nations were neither economically blockaded or neither political or had implications nor military implications were put on it, but rather the leagues ignored these two countries. Uh, these two countries' tactics. So then it is revengeful attitude of the vanquish. So the League of Nations was kind of seen as a revenge upon the enemy states, which have enemy states against the one powers. So it was seen as an act of revenge by the states which had lost because they kind of reduced their economy to rubbles. Their military merely existed. They had lost their power. The boundaries were taken off, and the earlier colonies were separated from them. So they were made to uh, they were made to pay huge losses. So that's why they've seen it as an enemy. So they've seen it as a revenge that has been put forward on them by these powerful nations. Then it lacks international spirit also. So because why? Because the countries have been divided, and the countries have uh, been very busy also, if you can look to through it. Why? Because they were busy reconstructing, they were busy resettling their economy, so they were busy doing all these things post war. So these countries had lacked cooperation to be working on a single cause. So everybody has become realist or selfish in growing their economy, in building their economy, but rather lost to look at the international space from uh, rather lost to look at international space from then from cooperation point of view. Then members of the league did not hesitate to violate the league covenant for the sake of their narrow national interests. So that's why this thing you can see in clearly in Japan and Italy, where they did violate the league's covenant for their own selfish purposes and also their national interest. Why this could also be seen at the failure of disarmament. So the failure of disarmament movement, where the another main purpose or the cause of establishment of League of Nations is to control the disarmaments, where the countries could, if where countries if achieved powerful weapons, the destructions would be much higher than what they have seen during World War One. That was also failed. Then economic nationalism. So what happened is economic depression of 1929-31 had been so severe, and the political and economic system of countries began to collapse everywhere. This on economic nationalism, we have briefly read it in previous lecture. So if you haven't attended or if you haven't listened to it, so please go through that. So where we have discussed very briefly about economic depression and what were the causes and how the countries should be responsible. What our countries are responsible and how did the reconstruction program go at in certain countries and what effect that this Great Depression or economic depression was on the third world, India and East Asia. So all these things you can understand from the yesterday's lecture. So if not, please go through. Then economic crisis also led to rise of fascism in Italy and Nazism in Germany, authoritarianism in Japan. So what happened was the due to the World War destruction, the German people, the sentiments were hurt. They were broken morally. So they saw this as a humiliation in international space, especially with Germany paying huge war indemnity. So that's what they they put their efforts in someone who led by the sentiments to be restored in Germany. So that's why the or authoritative governments have taken shape rather where there was a failure of democracy. Then other factors also contributed for the League of Nations, which could be lack of military power and its diaspora. So what happened was it was an understanding, or it was an backlash that the countries had lost hugely in World War I. So they could not be able to maintain such huge, sophisticated military because most of the money was transferred or was put upon economic development because unemployment rose and people have been losing jobs and industries have been closing. So in a way and politically it was also not proper. So in a way this has been causing the destruction and the economy was not circling. So that's why the military was reduced. And next thing is the most with improvement in scientific management and scientific technology, the more sophisticated weapons have come into the picture, so which have led to arms race. What is arms race? Like people buying arms so that they could balance it with the other their enemy nation or their neighborhood nation, so that they'll have this presence or exert their dominance in international space. But that could not be done and procedural unanimity rules. So there was no uniform rule. There was no uniform tactics that was followed by League of Nations because every nation, let's suppose only permanent members. So every permanent member would love to exert dominance on other four permanent members. So why would they even come to settle on a certain issue? So this their ego clashes has been very prominent in League of Nations or international space, then failed to ensure peace and security in international sense. So if you go through the whole lecture, the League of Nations main agenda is to control war, to promote peace and security. But the League of Nations failed to do the very aim or very agenda of League of Nations. Instead of stopping uh, the countries to going for war and settle, but rather the League of Nations have instigated the warlike situations among the countries because it had been very partially to some of the countries where it ignored some countries' invasion on the other nations, but rather it acted very strictly when in the notion of other countries where they have violated. So this also has created a loss of trust, a sense of trust on a League of Nations in public. Then it did an excellent work in social, economic, and humanitarian fields. Although they have been criticized for not achieving the peace and prosperity, but to an extent they tried to develop the social, economic, and socio-economic works in humanitarian fields. And this was an offshoot to United Nations also. So with So this was also an offshoot to United Nations also. So in a way, what happened was the League of Nations, although it was created for the main purpose of promoting peace and prosperity, it did not succeed. In fact, this elements of United Nations peace and prosperity rather affected the countries to go to war. It humiliated the uh, nations so badly that they got humiliated in international space and they couldn't uh, see it from the purview of the war and nature of war and winning, but the powerful nations also had humiliated these countries so much that they had taken upon the humiliations too personally, and people have been affected in moral sense also. So this had called for more rigorous or strenuous comeback by the countries which had led for the Second World War. And also Second World War immediately after that, the although United International Union or United Nations organizations was established, but same like League of Nations also, it did not although they did not there was no World War III type situations, but immediately after the establishment of United Nations, there was the starting of the Cold War or proxy war, which went on for 70 years, and finally it broke through the disintegration of USSR. But also, this if this has been the case, the United Nations, which was actually a puppet in the superpowers, it turned a blind eye to powerful nations where they were not following the norms and procedures of United Nations, which looks forward to um, maintain peace and security in international space. But this was favors. So this gave favorable preferences to nations, to powerful nations, and turning a blind eye to the works that have been done by them. So it also, although it was the case, the League of Nations or be it United Nations, they have tried controlling or maintain balance in international space to certain extent. So we cannot deny that they have outrightly uh, failed, but but even though outrightly did not fail and tried controlling some situations, but that doesn't mean that they controlled the warlike situations. So this is how you can understand League of Nations. So if we go through, if there's an League of Nations, you can understand like if you want to understand like why did it fail on a first hand note, then you can go through like the structural adjustment that the world had gone through during the war periods and during the interwar period and after the world wars. So for now that we have only read the First World War and Second World War and the causes, the time frame, and the consequences of those wars. So you can call this League of Nations as a consequence to the outbreak of First World War. So imagine the destruction of the First World War that we had. So that's why the First World War is also called as a Great War. That's why they have come up with an organization, especially when in international space, they think that there is no highest authority, there is no central authority. So what do you call this lack of central authority? So lack of central authority is nothing but there prevails anarchy. So if there as such there prevails anarchy, that's why the international relations, sorry, the states in international space do not act uh, in coordination or do not act uh, as per the other nations, but they would try to maximize their power, their interests, and their security. So this is how the League of Nations, if you look at the backdrop that how did it come into power, and the causes, there are failures for the League of Nations because if it had been successful, then we would have not seen any Second World War or be it for Cold War or be it disintegration or any wars that we see as of today. So, and also, it doesn't mean that the League of Nations was being quiet, but it had done. See, if you look at it, we may think that the League of Nations got failed and it did not work. But if we look through the previous slides, it shows that it existed for 20 years. So it existed for 20 more years. So we could have seen, if you could see through the wars that have been fought during these 20 years, so you can analyze how successful it was in some things or how partial it was in some of the wars. So through that phase, you can understand that did League of Nations really succeed, or League of Nations failed in controlling only the superpowers, where superpowers are at fault, or is it League of Nations are at fault? But if we go through the League of Nations structure, the structural office, then you can understand that it is very vaguely done. The powers and the functions and the objectives of such offices are are are, are not they do not treat everybody as such, because there has in international space there exists a notion of powerful state and the smaller state. So all the League of Nations have provided individual vote or single vote for every nation, in spite of the power, in spite of their economy, in spite of their development tactics in the world. But rather it was off the book notion. So that's why it need to be understood. Then League of Nations, can also look into the main organs of League of Nations and compare it with United Nations organization, where you can analyze how similar they are. Excuse me. How similar they are on in their structures, and what are the new offices that have been added to the United Nations. Then you can also look at the certain articles, the aims and objectives of League of Nations through the certain articles in the League Covenant that have been put forward while framing the excuse me while framing this League of Nations. So these articles are also important because especially with the competitive exams and the similarity between League of Nations and United Nations, you might at certain point get confused with United Nations, because as League of Nations doesn't exist, and you would be reading more about United Nations, so you might get confused between their functions, aims, and objectives. So that's how you can understand all these things. So if there's a question on a League of Nations, then you can write like what are the aims and objectives, successes and failures of League of Nations. So then you can write the genesis, like how did it come into the picture. So genesis of Campbell, Edward Grey, and Pope Benedict. Then it also acted as a movement of peace. Then League to enforce, then establishment of international organizations, then how the Paris Peace Conference was set up, and how this covenant was adopted by Paris Peace as a part of Treaty of Versailles, and the League Covenant Office, and how many articles does it have. Then you can also explain the main aim and objective of this League of Nations. So what is the main aim and objective of League of Nations? To promote international cooperation and international peace and security. So all these four or five aims and objectives that you can write with an answer, and also you can explain the organizational structure of League of Nations, like Assembly, Council, and Secretariat. What are their functions? How are they established, and how the members are elected, and how what are their terms, and like does it give equal power to all the nations, or does it give impartial powers to superpowers? Like that also you can analyze. You can criticize basically, as it is openly accepted that League of Nations is a failure. While explaining the functions, while explaining its aims and objective, you can criticize. You can criticize the League of Nations, saying that it is not as structurally maintained or put forward as it is expected, because we are dealing with not states of a single country, but rather different countries with different ideologies, and their power tactics and agendas are different. Like every country has one goal, right? So the goals are also different. So in spite of dealing with all these powerful nations, the structure of an organization which was meant to be controlling the superstructures, that should have been very rigid, not just vaguely done, so that it could be a puppet in the hands of powerful nations. So that's why it could turn a blind eye to invasions that have been done by Italy and Japan. And also next you can also accommodate the nature of League of Nations and various activities that have been done by this League of Nations. Then you can also accommodate like the causes and the failure of League of Nations very briefly. Here you can do positive criticism. So why did it actually fail, and what it should have done instead of doing A or B. So like that. So this is how you can structure an answer. And see you all. I hope you all understood today's lecture. And if there are any doubts, you can actually ask them in the upcoming lectures next time. So I think it's next week, if I'm not wrong. So, and also you have to practice all the lectures that we have done in this past 3 days, because they are very heavy to understand, and they are very data driven, because there are many timelines to remember, many treaties to remember. So once you are perfect with those things, you can analyze or understand like why the countries in international space behave as such. So this is how you can structure an answer, and please go through all the lectures on YouTube also, and make notes and properly revise those things, because like I'm teaching as per the questions, and also the structure would make you write answers easily, or make you develop answer writing practice. So this is how you can analyze things in international relations, which is very crucial, especially with the changing dynamics in international space. So see you all next time, and I hope you're all clear with it. So have a great Sunday. See you all.